afternoon to you. I am sure it is 4 o'clock somewhere. We have a special edition of Sports for CLE with Browns getting ready to play at 8 o'clock tonight against the Steelers downtown Cleveland. Special edition. We're going a little bit early. A few hours. Browns will kick it off against the Steelers and Russell Wilson. Wilson, 3-0 in his career against the Browns with Seattle and Denver. We remember that game last year. Passer rating, 114.7. Earlier this week, Russell Wilson met with the media, talked about what he has seen from this Browns defense.
They're obviously tough, physical. Obviously, it starts up front for them. They got some great players on the defensive side. I think they fly around. They're coached well. We got to bring our best football. Played these guys last year. They're physical. They fly around. They do a great job. Like I said, they're really well coached. Coach Schwartz does a great job coaching them up, and they're just such a talented group. So, you know, they're gonna make some plays here and there. You got to understand that. You got to understand the balance of the game. You know, and just really, you know, just playing the game. If it's a 4-quarter game, you know, it's a 4-quarter game. You get to play the moments.
Let's welcome in Casey Kinnamon from the Orange and Brown Report, as well as the All Eyes on Cleveland podcast, Barking Browns podcast. Casey, Wilson was a problem, and he's got a lot more talent on the offensive side of the ball than he had with the Broncos last year.
First of all, that camera work was making me seasick just now. That was all over the place. Russell did a phenomenal job last year pre-snap reads. He understood what the Browns were trying to do, and he was able to go away from pressure and find easy answers. Everything was near the line of scrimmage. But yeah, I agree. Like, the difference between what he was in Denver and what he's been in Pittsburgh is the fact that Pittsburgh's leaned into his skill set. When I think of Russell Wilson, in NBA terms, he's a point guard who just shoots layups and threes. Everything's either a moon ball or it's a check down. And the Steelers have leaned into that, and they have the personnel to throw the moon ball. And guys, as outlet valves like Freiermuth and Warren, they have guys who can catch near line of scrimmage and do damage. So it's a pretty good mixture for him. And I think Arthur Smith has a good understanding of what Russell can do and what he can't do, and just leans into those strengths.
I would also expect there's a package in the red zone for Justin Fields just based on the problems that the Browns had with Taysom Hill last week. Better be ready for that, because you're going to get another guy that can run.
Yeah, I'm going to be having nightmares about that Taysom Hill game for years. So, yeah, just the understanding of what can happen against this Browns defense, and when you have someone with those kind of skills. And Fields has a little bit of that. I know last week they kind of went to a little package, and Fields didn't do so well. So hopefully he's in the doghouse. But after what you put on tape last week against Taysom Hill, don't be surprised if you see that every time a team has a player that kind of fits that mold.
All right, bigger concern for the Browns, how do they get points against the Steelers? The Steelers have allowed second least points per game in the league. Last week, kept the Ravens from scoring a touchdown, winning a game against the Baltimore Ravens. This is NFL defensive points per game. Chargers, who we've seen, number one, 14.5. Steelers, who we see tonight, 16.2. Broncos, who we will see Monday night, 16.6. So again, this Browns offense has struggled mightily, and it ain't getting any easier.
No, but what we did see last week was their ability to move the ball in between the 20s, but then they weren't able to convert that into points. And ultimately, that's what you have to do to win games. So it comes down to red zone efficiency. I mean, last week you scored 14 points. Obviously, that's not enough to win football games, but they were able to move the football and be explosive in the pass game and keep their defense on the sidelines and the things that you like to see. But at the end of the day, you got to bog down. The Browns had 2 drives that ended on 4th down turnovers, where they just gave the ball back, and they also obviously missed field goals. So that's not going to float against the Steelers. You have to be efficient. And if you're lucky enough to get inside that 20-yard line, you got to come away with 6. You got to find a way. So it's got to be building on from what they did in the 20s and then capitalizing once you get in the red zone.
All right, so this is from PFF. It's offensive supporting cast rankings in terms of average team. PFF, rush, receiving, pass blocking, and run blocking grades, everything except passing, first 11 weeks. Lions 1, Ravens 2, Falcons 3, Steelers are 20th. Browns are ahead of only the New England Patriots, 31st out of 32. Now, it's improved, I believe, with Winston at quarterback, but the offense still, they're struggling.
Yeah, it's definitely gotten better. It's been more watchable. There was actually fun to be had, and not just doom and gloom. And they got the ball just like, well, here comes another 3 and out. They're out of that stage, but they still have to end up capitalizing and scoring points. And for me, it's their inability to run the football. I think is what's keeping them this far down on the list. Because the pass makers have kind of came alive, and you start to see promise and hope for what they could be going forward. But the run game is still very inefficient, and that comes down to blocking, comes down to scheme. And as the more healthy Nick Chubb gets, he's going to erase some of those problems, but he can't erase all of those problems. So, overall, I do like the direction they've been going in the last 3 weeks, but it's not enough, and you need to find ways to be efficient in the run game and marry the run and the pass together, because this pass game's ready to come to life. The running game just needs to meet that, and then we can see if they can make progress in this, and they could be up closer to where the Steelers are at on that list in the number 20 range.
All right, as you can imagine, plenty of voicemails. Let's head to the voicemail of Truth and Reason.
Everybody wants to give Jameis Winston all his flowers for playing so much better and going downfield and having the opportunity to give his receivers the best opportunity to catch a ball. But nobody is pointing out the fact that Ken Dorsey is now the offensive coordinator calling every single play. So Stefanski has messed up this entire season. Him and Injurberry on arrogance. They didn't think that we needed to draft a single starter. Every single person said, all we have to do is just draft for backups now. And so, yes, we're in a situation where we're looking from the outside in, and a change needs to be made. We have lost the complete locker room. I mean, I've never heard an organization say that they've been unprepared or say that they had to practice harder or didn't practice enough. So that tells you right there that they have quit on the team. So they have to get a new coach.
As always, appreciate all the voicemails. I am not sure that Ken Dorsey calling the plays is what's happening. I think the same plays were called for Deshaun Watson. He wasn't throwing the ball downfield. If you watch that's my read. He didn't process what was going on. But if you want to point to play calling, all right, I'll listen to it. I haven't seen them. I have not seen them quit on Stefanski. If that is in fact happening, and you see that, I get why you would move on from him. I haven't seen that yet. I will say that right now.
So when I look at this, if I'm going to really believe in that statement, then like I didn't watch last year, because I've seen Stefanski succeed with a quarterback very similar to the skill set of Jameis Winston. So to believe that he couldn't be doing what Dorsey's doing is pretty far-fetched for me. I think that if Stefanski would have held on to play calling duties, we would see very similar outcomes. So I can't go along with that. And as far as the drafting, it gets overblown. Now, a lot of this is accentuated by the fact that you didn't have first-round picks, so you're not getting these big names. But if you were banking on rookies to come save your season, this was lost to begin with. And you're still getting like commensurate value for all your picks. His hit rate's just as good as anyone else's. It's not an exact science. It's almost like the weather. It's a little better than a coin flip that you're going to get what you think you're getting. These kids are coming out of college, and they're not all going to be hits. And if you look across the league, I know we're in this Browns bubble, but every other organization has the same thing that happens where, you thought you had a player coming in who was going to do X, Y, Z, then you get him there and it never comes to fruition. So I'm not willing to go there. I do think that there are things you can judge Stefanski for. I think that there are some things that you could knock him for and you'd be completely just. But if it's going to be play calling, that's going to ring hollow to me.
Yeah, you know what? The injuries, maybe they're not. If you want to go there with practices and those kind of things, I'll listen to you. If you want to go to preseason, I'll listen to you. I don't necessarily think the team has quit on him, though. And again, we'll see. These last games are important to see how the team reacts to Kevin Stefanski, I think.
Yeah.
The concerning thing is they've lost their identity. They can't run the football.
Yes.
That's if you want me to say something that I think's bad, they can't run the football, and they're not physical, and they were before this year.
Yeah, and they've always had an ability to marriage the run and the pass and kind of keep defenses on their heels. And without the ability to do that, all of a sudden you become one-dimensional. And then all of a sudden, Jameis's propensity to throw interceptions is even amplified because teams know you're going to throw it. It's different when they can't have a read on it and they have to respect the run just as much as they do the pass and get caught with their one foot on the merry-go-round. And they just haven't had that. They have not had early down run efficiency or run efficiency of any metric. And that was the staple of what you would consider a Kevin Stefanski offense.
All right, this is concerning as well. Mike Tomlin asked what he sees from Nick Chubb.
It's the same Chubb. They might be utilizing him different. Obviously, they've gone through not only a quarterback change, but a play caller change. Ken Dorsey is their play caller, and if you remember Ken from his days in Buffalo, it was less run game centric in Buffalo than in Cleveland, and that may have something to do with the lack of touches as well, just in terms of the play caller's approach to football. We got so much respect for Mr. Chubb and what he's capable of doing, not only now, but his body of work. Make no mistake, whether they choose to run it or throw it, if he's in the game, he'll have our attention on Thursday night.
And again, the way you utilize a guy like Nick Chubb, granted he's coming off injury, he's still a guy that threatens the There's a head coach telling you he threatens the defense.
Yeah. The fact that he calls him Mr. Chubb lets you know he has all the respect. And it also lets you know that if Nick Chubb has success in tonight's game, and I think he will, it's going to be because it's earned. It's not going to be because he caught them off guard. He is a focal point for that defense. He has been every time they've played, and Chubb's had great success against Pittsburgh in the past, and that's why he's earned that respect. And I would think that his lack of touches, which isn't even really a lack, if you just look over week, he's hit 15, 11, he's been in that range. And now that he's had a bye week and another week to get acclimated in front of the home fans, I think you'll start to see that ramp up. But I don't know if you're going to see it ever eclipse 20 this season, just based on where he's at from his injury and where this team's at in general. So I don't think they're intent on running Chubb into the ground. But I know that there's going to be an emphasis to get him the ball, especially if they get in the red zone, given who they're playing and how things ended for him last year.
Casey Kinnamon and I are going to step aside, take a quick timeout. We'll head back to the voicemail of Truth and Reason. Sports4CLE will be right back.
I just picked up all the Ohio Lottery holiday scratch-offs.
They're multiplying.
Yeah, multiplying. With the chance to multiply my prize by 200 times with holiday bonus millions.
No, they're multiplying.
Oh. You're in a daze.
A holidays.
Snap out of it, because even if we don't win instantly, all the holiday games offer a second chance to win up to 1,000 times the price of the ticket.
Wait, did you say up to 1,000 times?
Sure did.
We continue talking Browns with Casey Kinnamon from the Orange and Brown Report, the All Eyes on Cleveland podcast, as well as the Barking Browns podcast. Let's head back to the voicemail of Truth and Reason.
I just wanted to call in and address, everybody seems to be clamoring for Mike Vrabel to be the new head coach, and Mike Vrabel is in the building. He is helping. He's assisting Coach Stefanski. He's helping his buddy Jim Schwartz. He's in there. He's not trying for him to lose, and they're still 2-8. I'm not saying he's not a good coach. He sure is, but you cut bait with Stefanski, I don't think we're going to get a better coach. Nobody wants to coach for Cleveland. The salary cap is going to be a mess if you ain't got Andrew Berry to deal with it, and our quarterback situation's bleak. Probably better off to ride out with Stefanski and Berry and see if they can right the ship. I believe they can. It's going to take time. We've been very injured this year and last year. Last year we got lucky with an easier schedule. This year we had some horrible calls, totally injured offensive line, and Deshaun Watson's a shadow of what he used to be. Nobody saw that coming. I can't blame those guys for that.
As always, appreciate all of the voicemails. Casey, the part that I think is really relevant, there's going to be a bunch of head coaching openings. This is not going to be an attractive job without a quarterback and with salary cap mess that is the Deshaun Watson contract that you're in right now.
Yeah, the caller had many excellent points, one of which is if you do move on from the GM, because of the road you've went so far down with front-loading these things, you need someone who can step in and navigate that. That's a tough ask. It's very specific how they're running. You look at Philadelphia, the Saints to a degree. There's some other teams that have operated in this manner, and if you just cut bait and put just a standard GM who's used to a standard way of doing things, a lot of those contracts will come to roost, and then you'll truly be in salary cap hell. So that's something to consider if you do move on from Barry. But it's if Kevin Stefanski were to be fired, and that, I don't agree with that as of right now. I'll change my opinion as more information presents itself. But he would not be unemployed very long. He'd probably spend a year, maybe as a consultant somewhere, because he doesn't feel like the kind of guy that would go into TV. But when the next coaching cycle comes up, you'd see how quickly he'd be hired from what he's done here in the past. This season they've underperformed and it's been very underwhelming. But I know we live in the moment, and it's what have you done for me lately? But everyone who's clamoring, wanting to move on to Vrabel, there's a lot of moving parts there. Like if you hire Mike Vrabel, like he's training to be a head coach / GM. That's why he's here. He's shadowing in the front office and doing the coaching stuff because his next opportunity, he wants to be able to shop for the groceries and cook the meal. So are you willing to hand both those things over to Mike Vrabel? Because that would be what would happen if he's going to coach here. So there's a lot of things to consider. And a lot of people are wanting to make definitive statements right here, right now, today, week 12. This is what has to happen. Let the season play out. There'll be plenty of time for speculation when the season ends.
Yeah, the other thing I would say is anybody who has a young quarterback would be looking at Kevin Stefanski as a head coach. The Bears come to mind immediately because I'm guessing there's going to be an opening there. All right, everybody has different opinions about the Deshaun Watson trade and whose idea was it? Mike Florio, Pro Football Talk, talks about that topic.
Bad ownership dragging down the team. Bad ownership making decisions and hiding behind the coach and the GM like the Haslams have done with the Deshaun Watson thing. Gets back to your point from earlier. If the Jets had benched Aaron Rodgers, Woody would have been, I don't make football decisions. And they've never been candid with who really was the one. Who was the one? Who was the prime mover? Who was the impetus for this Deshaun Watson debacle with the $230 million fully guaranteed over 5 years, and you give up 3 first-round picks and 3 other draft picks? You got the nucleus of your young, developing, emerging team for 5 years to come by giving up those draft picks. So they've never been candid that it goes to ownership, but it does.
And again, I can see how he arrives at that. I don't necessarily know that to be true. They keep saying it's collaborative, and collaborative to me means we're not telling you who made the decision.
Yeah, 2 things there. They're never going to be candid about that. So if you're waiting on that, good luck. And how did they gut the nucleus of this young team? Like I missed that part of the journey here.
And again, people keep pointing to they don't have the young guys in the pipeline. Well, the problem is they're young guys played really well one year. You look at DeJuan Jones, Martin Emerson come to mind. You still have Grant Delpit, JOK. But JOK, how serious is the injury?
Yeah.
DeJuan Jones, injured. Delpit's still playing well. It's been a bad year. The question is, how much blame do you place on Barry and Stefanski for a bad year when they've had 2 really good years, 2 mediocre years, and you just extended them?
Yeah, they just extended him, kind of cloudies it a little bit. But I will say that this season was undone by an abysmal quarterback contract and subpar play from said player, and then just as many injuries as you had last year. You were able to circumnavigate that last year and arrive at a place where many didn't think you could get, given everything that you dealt with. This year, they've just not been able to do that. Does that mean I don't trust the process? Now, if you want to put all the eggs in to blame them for the Deshaun stuff, I can't defend it. I can't defend his play. I can't defend the contract. And if that's going to be the nail in the coffin, that's going to be the nail in the coffin. But that's already happened. There's nothing we can do to fix that. Like, you banked on a player to be a certain thing, and he just never got to that level. And 12 other teams submitted bids to get the same guy, and 4 other teams were accepted. Like, the Browns were just one of many. They just landed the guy. So now you have to live with the results of that. If those results are enough to damn this coaching staff and this GM, because they're never going to find out whose role it was to go get them. Like, that's not going to come out until the ESPN 30 for 30 5 years after those guys are gone. So in the meanwhile, we're just going to play in this guessing game. I don't know that it was ownership. I don't know that it was Andrew Barry. We're not going to know. So it's kind of useless to speculate. The thing is, it happened, and now you got to deal with it. Can you deal with it? Are these the group of coaches and GMs that you expect that can get through that? If you think they can, then you let them do it. If you think they can't, then you have to cut bait.
The other thing I would say, you got to change what you're doing in training camp. And it's 2 years of significant injuries.
Yes.
And it's all over the board. So I don't know if it's more physical. Whatever you're doing is not working. So tear that out of the little manual, get rid of it, and move on to something different.
Yeah, they've had so many injuries. Now, there's going to be things like the JOK thing. You're not going to be able to, like that. That's just the way that play went down. Or Dewan getting rolled up on. These are just terrible like bouts of luck. But there's just been a litany of injuries and soft tissue and pulls and things that seem like they could be semi-avoidable. And when you have so many of them in a row, you have to look at your training staff. You have to look at the way you ramp up your off-season, your strength and conditioning program. All those things together, if you put them all in a bucket and they're giving you this, and they've done this over a pretty big sample size now, then you have to change things up. You don't have a choice. So I don't know who makes a decision to hire the training staff. I don't know who comes up with the strength and conditioning program. I don't know if there's, we always talk about rehab as far as injuries. Well, there's a prehab that you can do to avoid injuries. Like and I know they put the money into the facilities to have state-of-the-art training facility, and they do have prehab and stuff there, and cold tubs, cold plunges, saunas. But they have to be implemented. You can have all the nice stuff, but if you're not using it in the right way, it's not going to do you any good. But they have had that many injuries that you have to take a hard look of how you've been going about business and then redirecting course to get a different outcome.
Well, we've talked about it. The offense has looked much better since Jameis Winston took over as the quarterback. Mike Tomlin, what he sees Jameis Winston when he looks on tape.
He is what we describe in this business as a gunslinger, meaning that he is going to take his shots. He is aggressive and competitive. There may be some opportunities for you in terms of getting the ball, but that's not going to slow him down from taking his shots. And so the up and down that you mentioned, sometimes it manifests itself in the form of 300 and 400-yard games, and sometimes it manifests itself in the terms of three interception games. And so we better be on the screws. We know that the ball is coming. That's not in question. He's been aggressive in terms of his play virtually all of his life, and that's not going to change, and we better be ready to meet that aggression with equal aggression.
Casey, Steelers are second in the league in turnover margin, plus 11. So not exactly what I want to hear with Jameis getting ready to throw the ball on a cold, rainy, snowy night.
Yeah, he's spot on there with Jameis. That's the way you see it. Everybody's going to have an opportunity. Have your guys be ready. But that ball is coming out. He's not going to hold on to it. Now, if you can get instant pressure on him, you can get sacks because he doesn't have the escapability or the reactive athleticism to make free blitzers, miss in space and then make plays. But he's going to look to make plays at every level, and you have to cover every blade of grass if you're playing Jameis Winston, because he will not hesitate to let it rip. And when he's on, he's deadly. And you just got to catch him on an off night, or do what the Chargers were able to do and take some things away and confuse him. And because the ball's coming out either way, like even if he's confused, that ball's still coming out because he's going to try to give his guys an opportunity. Then it becomes up to the defense to capitalize. Tomlin's a smart guy. Like I don't know, I get heat for it every time I say it. He's the type of coach that if you're a player you want to play for. He tells it like it is. He's a straight shooter. But I would imagine he probably gets a kick out of Jameis. Just he's been around every type of quarterback, and there's all types of leaders, and to listen to the way Jameis talks and the way Tomlin carries himself, I bet those two would actually get along.
Casey Kinnamon and I are going to step aside, take a quick time out. Other side of the break, back to the voicemail of Truth and Reason. Sports4CLE, be right back. Stay with us.
Come back to go forward. Back to learning new things. Back to pursuing your dreams. Tri-C has flexible learning options to fit your life. And every year, more than 1,000 local companies provide Tri-C students with real-world learning. The right education can boost your lifetime earning power by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Start now with a college education you can afford. Tri-C, where futures begin.
We continue talking Browns on this special edition of Sports4CLE with Casey Kinnamon from the Orange and Brown Report. Let's head back to the voicemail of Truth and Reason.
So everybody's calling for Kevin and Andrew Berry's job, and even Paul DePodesta. In my honest opinion, I would not fire them because, as you saw, the Jets have fired basically the general manager, head coach, etc. And I think that if we fire Kevin and Andrew, I think the Jets will, jump on Kevin and Andrew fast just because of the relationship that they have. If Kevin is in a stable environment where the owner and, the fan base is better, he's going to win a Super Bowl. And we all knew how that turned out when we had Bill Belichick as our head coach. So I'm just making it aware to Browns fans, we cannot jump the gun or fire Kevin Stefanski because we're having a bad year. If Jimmy does it, we're going to have a whole nother rebuild. And that's not fair to Kevin. So, yeah, go Browns.
As always, appreciate all of the voicemails. Casey, I covered the Belichick Browns, and nobody thought Bill Belichick was going to be the type of head coach that he was. Was a smart guy, made some really interesting decisions, pissed off the media and the fan base.
Yeah.
But again, the question is, if you are going to move on from Kevin Stefanski and Andrew Berry, even one or the other, it's a rebuild because you're going to have different types of skill sets and players that you're going to want. So the question becomes, what do you think of the overall roster? Was it as good as we thought before the season? Probably not. Is it as bad as it looks right now? Probably not.
Yeah, it's probably the easiest thing to do in all sports is overvalue your own roster because the lens of which you see the game. I try to be as impartial as I can be looking at other rosters, and I know that if you were to interview 31 other GMs, there are several GMs that would probably take this roster over the ones that they either inherited or they've built. But there's definitely, they weren't as deep as they thought they were, and they weren't able to sustain some of the things, the injuries that happened and stuff like that. But I'll also put this out there when people talk about tear it all down and get a new head coach and a new GM, and you have the talent to win. Well, if you do that, you're going to have different talent. They're not going to be the new GM that comes in. They're not going to be married to these guys. These aren't the players they pick. They're going to want their own guys. So be prepared that if they do that, they're going to get rid of a lot of the people that you value. Just keep that in mind. That's something, and that's not just here. That's all of pro sports. Anytime a new regime comes in, they want to put their stamp on it. And if that means some players that you think are untradeable, all of a sudden they become pretty tradable pretty quickly. The comparisons with Belichick, it's funny because they both give non-answers in pressers, but Bill's is a very different approach. He was surly and grumpy, and Stefanski's just giving you just straight up coach speak. You might get a glimpse of agitated Stefanski every now and again when he's answered the same question with different phrasing for the third time straight. But they're different approaches. But like you said, no one saw Bill reaching the heights, the greatest heights any NFL coach has ever reached. No one saw that in the early 90s when he was in Cleveland, I promise you.
No.
But he was at the cutting edge of a lot of things. And if you look at the staffs he was able to assemble, a lot of those guys went on to become GMs and head coaches. And we have one right here in Schwartz. Schwartz was part of that. He was one of the gophers for Bill, just doing anything he could just to hang around an NFL team. So Bill's had an eye for talent. We haven't yet seen anyone leave Stefanski and have any modicum of success, except for Drew Petzing in Arizona. That is something that to monitor there. But there are very different approaches here, and it's not guaranteed. I can't guarantee that Stefanski wins a Super Bowl. That's a nice statement. There's no guarantee of that for any NFL head coach, even no matter how many awards you've won or success that you've had. But we do look around our own division, and you see the stability. That's what you're aiming for. That doesn't mean you put up with subpar coaching just to get to the stability. You want to thread that needle, but at the end of the day, that's what you're aiming for, is you do want true stability in your franchise so you can have a foundation from which to build.
Yeah, the one thing I will say, you never knew what was going on behind closed doors when Belichick was there. Same thing that drives people crazy about Stefanski was the same thing. He was just a little bit more standoffish. And again, I never had any issue with him because if you asked him thoughtful football questions, you got really thoughtful answers. If you just threw stuff out there, he was going to throw it back at you, and he didn't care what it looked like, and that's one of the reasons that he rubbed a lot of the media the wrong way. All right, this is from Dog Pound Daily. 3 reasons you shouldn't be shocked if Kevin Stefanski is fired. Browns aren't just losing, they're losing ugly. Number 2, the offense is still terrible. And number 3, the players are undisciplined. Although, you know what? All those are true. I can't argue with it. The question I have is, was he told, and this is going to go another thing, we're never going to know, was he told, you need to change the offense to maximize Deshaun Watson? If that was coming from Andrew Berry, Haslam, DePodesta, that's where you transfer this back to.
Yeah, for sure. When I look at those 3 reasons, the losing ugly, that's the most damning thing to me. Is, when things have gotten truly out of hand to where you can't even compete, because there's not winning games and there's not competing in games, and they've had the doors blown off of them in a couple now, to where that's not been what's happened through Stefanski's tenure. They've lost plenty of games where they were in it and they weren't able to make the play at the end. Even earlier in the season, we had plenty of those games, 1-score games where you just weren't coming out on top. And that's the biggest variance in the NFL year to year is 1-score game wins or losses. Last year you were winning those games, this year you're losing them. But when you're getting blown out, that's ugly. And that creates a heavy environment in the locker room. And it's tough to have buy-in when that's happening, when you're going out and losing by 21 points as they did last week. It's tough to have player buy-in. I would push back on the word terrible for the offense. The offense has been terrible this year. As recently, I don't look at it as terrible. They need to be more efficient in certain areas, but you start to see where they're starting to grow. But the undisciplined part, that's something that also when we talk about things, if you want to make a list of things that are starting to be in that con bucket that are starting to outweigh the pros, undisciplined's one. On the Barking Browns the other night, Jacob Roach brought to the table where the Browns have ranked in penalties year over year under Stefanski, and it's top 10 almost every year. And there's different types of penalties. We didn't really break it down into subsets of pre-snap stuff that's all mental, but it seems to happen a lot. And for me, that's what really gets me. I can take some effort penalties. Now there's boneheaded effort penalties that you can put in the mental bucket as well, where you just can't do that. But effort penalties aren't the same as going off sides, neutral zone infractions, offsides, not being lined up correctly to begin with, like illegal motions, like those things. And when you have enough things in that con bucket start to outweigh the pro, that's where the balance can shift right there. And if you, at the end of the day, you have enough of those things in that bucket, you can point to why you need to move on. I can't defend those things.
Casey Kinnamon and I are going to step aside, take one more timeout. Other side of the break, we'll turn our attention a little bit more to the Steelers matchup coming up in just a few hours. Sports4CLE will be right back. Stay with us.
I just picked up all the Ohio Lottery holiday scratch-offs.
They're multiplying.
Yeah, multiplying. With the chance to multiply my prize by 200 times with holiday bonus millions.
No, they're multiplying.
Oh, you're in a daze.
A holidays.
Snap out of it. Because even if we don't win instantly, all the holiday games offer a second chance to win up to 1,000 times the price of the ticket.
Wait, did you say up to 1,000 times?
Sure did.
We continue talking Browns with Casey Kinnamon from the Orange and Brown Report, All Eyes on Cleveland podcast, and the Barking Browns podcast. Getting ready for the matchup with the Steelers in a few hours. Steelers are 13-6-1 in the last 20 games against the Browns. This from PFF.com. Steelers defense has excelled at shutting down deep passing attacks, allowing just 42.2% passer rating on throws of 20 or more yards downfield, second lowest in the NFL. Unit will face significant challenge against Winston, 5 touchdown passes of 20-plus yards since Week 8, ranked second in the league. Again, that's one of those ones where it scares me a little bit because he's going to sling it, and Steelers are pretty good defensively with what Jameis wants to do.
I want to touch on the first part. They have that record over the past 20 games. Over the past 10 games, this is a past 11 games since 2019. This is a 5-6 series. So it's been closer as of late. I know the gap seems, the further you go back, that larger that gap's going to get from how bad the Browns have been since '99. But they've played them more competitively as of late, especially under Stefanski. Jameis kind of plays into their strengths, doesn't he?
Yeah,
he does kind of what they capitalize on. But that's the mentality of a gunslinger. You're not going to back down from the fight, and he's going to try to give his guys opportunities to make plays. It's going to be on those young playmakers to go out there and get separation and be strong at the catch point, because there's going to be several opportunities for both teams to come down with Jameis passes tonight. But also with this weather coming in, will it be that kind of affair? Will we get to where they're just slinging it over the field? Jameis will probably still take his shots. I know Russell will take his. So there'll be some opportunity there. But Jameis has been throwing the ball as much as anybody in the NFL these last 3 weeks. I think that comes down a notch tonight. Vegas believes so too. The over-under originally was set at 42 points. That's down to 37 now. So I think they're anticipating a low-scoring, ugly, old-school AFC slop fest. And if that's the case, maybe Jameis throws it 30 times instead of 45.
All right, you wrote an article, 3 pivotal matchups Browns must win to beat the Steelers tonight. Number 1, Denzel Ward against George Pickens. Pickens has been really good with Russell Wilson as his quarterback. Number 2, Jack Conklin against T.J. Watt. Conklin has been getting healthier and healthier. And number 3, Nick Chubb against Minkah Fitzpatrick. It'll be interesting to see. Everybody kind of feels Nick Chubb is getting close to breaking one. Is this the night where it happens?
Well, Nick Chubb would never say it, but there's no way this game doesn't carry more weight than a normal game. I know he'll play it off, but just given the way everything ended week 2 of last season for him against this Pittsburgh team, for him to be back and be healthier than he's been, in his previous weeks, to get this opportunity to go against them. And this, I could have titled that Nick Chubb versus the entire Pittsburgh defense, but we just know from the hit that Minkah had last year. And I'm not inferring that Minkah's a dirty player. You could find half a dozen clips of Minkah going to tackle Nick Chubb and coming up with air. So he was just trying to get him on the ground. Unfortunate series of events, but this is a huge moment for Nick Chubb, and a huge moment for Browns fans if Nick Chubb can actually, because we saw it last week. There was a drive last week which Nick Chubb looked like Nick Chubb. I mean, just making guys miss, powering through stuff, getting extra yards, fighting to the end. Like, we need a game of that now. It's time, and it'd be a huge moment for Nick Chubb. And I don't think Browns fans could be any happier for any player as if Nick Chubb has a big game against the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Now, Denzel Ward against George Pickens. That matchup I like. I don't like any other cornerback against George Pickens if Ward has to go out of the game for any reason.
Yeah, and I like Martin Emerson against bigger-bodied guys, but not with the skill set of George Pickens. George Pickens' skill set is vertical down the field on the boundary, and he's great at it. Like, if the field was a half yard wider, he would have like twice as many touchdown catches that he has. Like, he's always near the boundary, always making plays, but he has that long speed for someone his size that makes him dangerous. Denzel possesses that long speed and the ability to make plays on the football. So that's the matchup I'm trying to keep as much as possible. And I know Schwartz doesn't like to travel, but if I was going to do it any week, he's the receiver you have to take out. I would put Emerson on Mike Williams, and I would live with the results there. If they beat you, fair play. But I don't want to get beat just because you want to match up someone else with George Pickens. It's got to be Denzel Ward.
All right. Before I let you go, what do you need to see tonight and moving forward to make you believe Kevin Stefanski is the guy who can help turn this around? What are you looking for relative to the Browns head coach? And I think you're kind of with me right now. I think he's the solution, but what do we need to see moving forward?
Competitiveness. You got to take it to them. You got to, this game, look, if you just look at it from a talent perspective, they don't have more talent than you. They've just played better than the sum of their parts, and you played less than. You got to bridge that gap. They're coming here. They're 8-2, and you were 2-8. You're sitting at polar opposites of the AFC North Division here. Bridge that gap. Go show them they're not Big Brother. They're coming to your place on a short week. Typically, that's a winnable game. That's the Browns have beaten the Steelers on Thursday night at home several times in recent years. Keep that going. Remind them that they're not who they think they are, and that you're better than your 2-8 record. Because you have the last 7 games of the season is an audition. It's an audition not just for the coaching staff, but for the players, everyone who wants a spot on this roster next year. Go out there and put your best foot forward. And the short week, and the weather, it kind of mitigates who the better team is usually. Usually that gives the lesser team a better of a shot. And there's no disputing that the Browns come into this the lesser team, given the way the Steelers are firing on all cylinders. I believe they're looking to win their 6th straight game. And Russell's 4-0 as a starter, looking for his 5th straight win. Bridge that gap. Do not give them anything. Take from them everything. This is a rivalry, and make it feel like a rivalry. This can't be a big brother opportunity for Pittsburgh.
The other thing is the offense has to play well. You have to see the offense, and quite frankly, you got to see the run game get a little bit better.
Yeah, and that's the one thing that's disheartening, is that's who this team has been built to be, and they've been winning in the trenches for 5 years on both sides, and that's not been the case on the offensive side of the ball, and they've been unable to institute an efficient running game, and that's all that it needs to be. It doesn't need give me 1 or 2 explosive runs, but you need to be setting yourself up for 2nd and 6 and 3rd and 3s, and that's just not been the case. And then when you start to see 3rd and 8 and 3rd and 10s, that's when the mistakes happen, and then the avalanche comes. So be efficient in your run game. Form an identity over these last 7 games. Form an identity. That's what we need to see.
Casey Kinnamon, as always, great stuff. Appreciate the time and the insight. Thanks very much, Casey.
Hey, anytime, Dave. Thanks for having me.
Casey Kinnamon, make sure you check him out from the Orange and Brown Report, the All Eyes on Cleveland podcast, and also the Barking Browns podcast. We're going to step aside, take a quick time out. Dalton Wasserman, PFF data analyst, co-host of the PFF College Football Show. We're talking Browns when Sports4CLE continues. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program is dedicated to recognizing exceptional students, teachers, and schools throughout Ohio. Scan the QR code on screen to nominate students and teachers as Academic All-Stars and Teachers of the Month. They must be currently enrolled or teach in grades K through 12. Is your K through 12 school developing students' literacy skills to achieve success in reading? If so, you can nominate your school for the School of the Year. Students can win $100, teachers can win $500, and schools can win $2,500. Scan the QR code, fill out the forms, and nominate deserving students, teachers, and schools today. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program takes pride in honoring exceptional students, teachers, and schools across Ohio. Submit your nomination today. It's fun, fast, and free. We continue talking Browns on Sports4CLE. Let's head back to the voicemail of Truth and Reason.
Hey, everyone. I'm intrigued with the Alabama player Jalen Milrose as a future QB for us. He reminds me of Cam Newton from the Carolina Panthers a while back. Wow, can he run with power and speed. His arm is strong, does need to work on accuracy, both of which remind me of Newton. Not sure what his injury history is as a running QB. He sure seems mature at the position. How long could the Browns wait in the draft to pick him up? Haven't heard his name that much. Thanks, guys.
As always, appreciate all of the voicemails. Let's welcome in Dalton Wasserman, PFF data analyst, also co-host of the PFF College Football Show. So what about it, Dalton? Milroe, big, strong kid. Where do you think he lines up draft-wise?
So I think he's one of the bigger X factors in this draft because I think there's 2 clear guys that are going to go in the first round, probably early. Shedeur Sanders from Colorado and Cam Ward from Miami. But Milroe is the one guy in the draft with kind of different tools than everybody else. You mentioned the Cam Newton comparison, and that's probably a little bit lofty. He still needs a lot more polish as a passer with his footwork, and there's definitely a book out. If you blitz him a lot, he has some issues in speeding up his process. But I think teams are going to be tantalized with the tools just like they were with Anthony Richardson a couple of years ago, right? And I think when you have a guy like that with tools, and we've seen it with Lamar Jackson, with Jaden Daniels, with Josh Allen, with a lot of these running quarterbacks, that it is a huge X factor in these teams' offenses. It adds such another dimension in the run and the pass game that Milroe could bring that. I would prefer him as a guy who would sit for a year or maybe even 2 to develop more of the fundamentals, but I could see a team taking a swing just based on his tools in the top 10 to 15, even though I might personally not do it.
Yeah, and in that instance, you would want, a bridge quarterback for a year or 2. I get it. The one thing, and I'm curious as to your reaction to this, the thing that concerns me the most is when a guy has accuracy issues. Now, Josh Allen had him and figured him out.
It's kind of a thing where most guys don't completely overhaul accuracy issues, but then there's been a handful of guys who have, and Josh Allen's been used as the best example, right? And I think Milroe it's not the worst we've ever seen. It's just not great. And he definitely prefers to throw the ball deep down the field more often. So if a team can figure out how to speed up his footwork a little bit and just get his release going, because you know what it is. It's just he's got a great arm. He misses a lot of balls high. There's a lot of overthrows, right? And I think it's just a matter a lot of times of the mechanics, of his delivery and just bringing the ball down a little bit, and sometimes even bringing a different pace to the football, right? There's a lot of quarterbacks who can change the pace and the speed of the ball, whereas Milroe right now is kind of a one-speed thrower. So down the field, he's very accurate, and that's the part that's going to intrigue teams a lot, like it did with Anthony Richardson. But it's a lot of the shorter throws that move the chains and get first downs that he needs to work on.
All right, so this from PFF Steelers tweeting out, Russell Wilson ranks 5th among quarterbacks in PFF passing grades against man coverage this year. He'll face Browns defense that runs man coverage at the 6th highest rate in the NFL. When you look at Wilson, how stark is the difference between man and zone coverages from what you've seen with him this year?
It is stark because the best asset that he brings, Wilson, as opposed to Fields, is the touch on his deep ball. And he's been one of the best deep passers in the league this year. And when he brings that is when he sees his receivers in press man coverage on the outside, right? When you have teams playing softer zone coverage, they have to get a little more conservative or the Steelers are going to run the ball. But the high-level production has come with defenses in man, especially with George Pickens, who's been one of the best receivers, on deep throws and against man coverage this year. It's just the style that Wilson brings instead of Justin Fields with, those moon balls that he's throwing down the field. He's got a much more accurate deep ball. He gives his receivers a chance to win downfield, and that happens when you get in those press man one-on-one situations. So it's more a difference in style. Obviously, it's a little bit different than Justin Fields, and that's why they brought Wilson in to start. But I think when you get those looks in those one-on-one matchups, that's the optimal time to throw it down the field.
So if we switch sides of the ball for the Browns, now Browns offense has looked better without Jameis Winston. There's no argument with that. 2 of them have been pretty high level, high yardage. Chargers not quite as good with the 3 turnovers. Steelers head coach Mike Tomlin on what he's seen from the Browns wide receiving core.
They got a deep receiving core, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Moore in the slot as well. They got plenty of talent. They just elevated Tony that they picked up from Kansas City early in the year. He'd been on their practice squad. They activated him last week, and he played in some Packers football for them. And so they probably moved on from Cooper because of the depth at the position that they had and the evolution of young guys. Again, as you mentioned, Judy is not new to the NFL, but he's new to them and has gotten comfortable. He's coming off a really big game. Tillman is a second-year player, and he's taking the step that you see most second-year players take. No questioning his talent. We did a lot of work on him when he came out of Tennessee, and he's a big, strong guy. He carries the run game fight. He's capable of making combat catches, and so I don't think that any of us are surprised by the uptick in his production as well.
So, Dalton, my question to you is this with the Browns wide receiving core. We'll get to Judy in a minute. It seems to me like they still lack a number one. The guy, you get the ball in his hands and defenses go, man, what are we going to do? Even George Pickens is that kind of guy. And I like Judy. I like Tillman. I don't see that guy on this roster right now. Am I missing something?
No, I agree with you. I think you have several guys that you can like, but nobody that you love is that number one option, right? Like Amari Cooper was the last couple of years, or like so many teams have around the league. And it's going to be a discussion come draft time is, do they draft a number one receiver? Is that an option? Do that? You mentioned the quarterback situation before, but this team may not even be well-positioned enough with their roster to take a young quarterback and start him on day one, in part because of this. They don't have a number one receiver, and we've talked before about their offensive line issues. I think there's some guys playing well right now because Jameis Winston has unlocked a little bit of a downfield element that Deshaun Watson wasn't, because he was just so almost afraid to throw the football down the field. Jameis isn't afraid of any throw. So these guys are allowed to produce a little bit more than they were with Watson. But you're right. You don't see a number one guy here. I could see Judy being a 2 and Moore and Tillman kind of acting as that co-3 and 4 kind of guy. But they do need a number one guy, and I would expect that to be something they look at in this draft.
All right. So I mentioned Judy. This is kind of interesting. So since Winston took over at quarterback, He's had 18 receptions. That's tied for 10th in the NFL. 294 receiving yards, tied for 5th. 94 yards after catch, tied for 9th. 13 first downs, tied for 7th. The production you were looking for from Jerry Jeudy came when you finally moved off of Deshaun Watson.
Yeah, and I think it's a product of Jeudy being really good in the intermediate range, that 10 to 19-yard range in the field. He's a really good route runner. He might not be the fastest receiver you've ever seen, but he's a great route runner. When he gets a clean release, he can really separate. And I see a guy who's making a lot of plays in the intermediate parts of the field, in the middle of the field, and windows where Jameis Winston is not afraid to throw the football, whether it goes for better or worse. That's always how it's been with Jameis. But Judy's really the main guy that's been taking advantage of those opportunities. You see those deep in cuts and over routes and even 10 to 15 yard out routes. That's really the sweet spot where he can operate. So and then I like what Cedric Tillman's given him as a vertical threat, and then Elijah Moore as a route runner as well. But Jeudy, I think, has become a reliable chain mover as you get a quarterback in there who's not afraid to make those throws into tight windows.
Dalton Wasserman, PFF data analyst, co-host of the PFF College Football Show, and I are going to step aside, take a quick timeout. We'll talk a little bit about some free agent wide receivers, turn our attention to college football. Buckeyes with a big game against a Big Ten conference opponent. Sports4CLE, be right back. Stay with us.
Come back to Go Forward. Back to learning new things. Back to pursuing your dreams. Tri-C has flexible learning options to fit your life. And every year, more than 1,000 local companies provide Tri-C students with real-world learning. The right education can boost your lifetime earning power by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Start now with a college education you can afford. Tri-C, where futures begin.
We continue talking Browns with Dalton Wasserman, PFF data analyst, co-host of the PFF College Football Show. Get to college football in just a minute. This is interesting. Kevin Stefanski, Browns head coach, some of the numbers when you look at it. 4 double-digit losses. That is the most in a season since Stefanski has been the head coach. 3rd down offense, still the worst in the NFL. Lost 7 of their last 8. Worst string of Stefanski's career. 6 of the last 7 Browns coaches fired after a loss to the Steelers. They face the 8-2 Steelers on Thursday, today, and they've scored over 18 points only once this season. Dalton, the guy has shown he can coach. If the Browns move on from him, I have no doubt he'll be the first guy the Browns have moved on from since they came back that will get another head coaching job. My question is this: what do you need to see? I don't think the guys have quit on him yet. If you see that, that would be, immediate red flag. I think you got to see the offense. The offense, you have to be able to point to, look how bad the offense was. It was Deshaun Watson, in order to think that Kevin Stefanski is part of the solution moving forward.
Yeah, I agree. I think what you have is a situation where you get a functional quarterback in there, and is Jameis Winston your franchise guy? No, he's not. Everybody knows that. But you get a functional quarterback in there, and the offense at least looks like a threat, right? Beating Baltimore, and even last week the game was tied going into the 4th quarter, and then the defense was really the part that fell apart. I think you're exactly right. You just don't want to see them quit on him, and I don't think they have. And I think you have to weigh whether you can get a better asset than Kevin Stefanski, because he's a really good coach. He's a former coach of the year. We know he's a good modern offensive mind. And I don't know that there would be a whole lot of pros to letting him go. I'm not sure who else it would be to come in there and do a better job than he's done, especially when you think about last year making the playoffs with Joe Flacco. It was just last season, right? And this year you get Watson back in and it all falls apart. There's a lot more wrong with the roster of this team than the coaching staff. Personally, I think getting rid of Stefanski would be a mistake. I think that you just mentioned it. He would be very high on the list of several teams in the league. If they're, you're talking about big names like Bill Belichick and maybe Ben Johnson being on there, Stefanski would go right to the top of that list.
All right. We talked last segment. We both agreed the receiving core needs a boost. The names in free agency, the guys that are set to hit free agency, there's T. Higgins. I'm not 100% certain he's a number 1. He's kind of teetering on that line. Chris Godwin's will be coming off a fractured ankle. Cooper's been here. Diggs is hurt. Hopkins, Deontay Johnson, Slate. there's not an answer in free agency, minus maybe T. Higgins, when I look at that.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it's something you have to weigh again, considering what talent may be coming up in the draft. If you're talking about maybe a Travis Hunter from Colorado or a Teteroa McMillan from Arizona, can you get that same production eventually out of those guys at a cheaper price? Because T. Higgins is probably going to demand somewhere between $25 and $30 million a year, and is that really worth it for a Browns team that looks like they're about to go through a rebuild? And then the rest of that list, it's a lot of veteran guys who are going to get 1 or 2 year contracts. And you mentioned Godwin, who was off to a great start this year, but the fractured ankle kind of killed that. So, I don't know that it's a year for the Browns to go and splurge on a wide receiver. You got some other young guys like Judy and Moore and Tillman, like we mentioned. And again, I think it's an option in this draft. They have to figure out a lot more on their offense than just the receiver. But if that is something they feel like they need to fix this offseason, I would do it through the draft. All
right, college football rankings announced for this week, earlier in the week. Oregon's still number 1. Some movement, though, and here's how the bracket would lay out, if you will. Ohio State was 2, they'd be the 5th seed. Texas 3, they'd be the 2nd seed. Penn State 4, the 6th seed. Indiana at 5. So when you look at that, what was your initial reaction to how that laid out and the rankings?
So the biggest thing that jumps out there, obviously, is Boise State being the 4th highest ranked conference champion, which gets them a bye and into that 4th seed right now. I don't know that, and nothing against Boise State, I don't know that a BYU or even an SMU shouldn't still be ahead of them, even though actually Miami's there for the ACC. So we're really talking about BYU. And I know BYU lost to a Kansas team that's now 4-6, but I think you're still talking about a very good resume for BYU that could have them ahead of Boise State. A lot of the underlying numbers are actually pretty close to even, but I do think eventually if somebody runs the table here in their last 3 games in the Big 12, whether it's BYU or Arizona State or Colorado, I actually do think there's a good chance they could jump ahead of Boise again, and a Big 12 team could get that 4th spot. But that's the obvious scenario there that's become very real, is Boise State or maybe even another Group of 5 team being in play for that 4th bye week.
The other thing, Ohio State plays Indiana. In Indiana, undefeated behind a 1-loss Penn State team in the seeding. You can't control how your schedule lays out. It seems to me like there's a little bit of disrespect maybe to Indiana by the committee.
I mean, sort of, but they're also number 5 in the rankings, and there's a lot of people arguing that a lot of the SEC teams should be ahead of them based on strength of schedule. My problem is 2 things. One, with how big these conferences are, they're imbalanced schedules even within the conferences. When there's 16, 18 teams within a conference, you're only playing 8 or 9 conference games, you get an imbalance in the schedule that really throws things off when you talk about Penn State's schedule versus maybe, an Ohio State's or an Oregon's or Indiana's schedule as well. You get it in the SEC too, with certain teams where Texas really hasn't played anybody outside of Georgia, and Alabama's played every elite team in the conference. So that's become an issue. The other thing is, I think we have to remember with strength of schedule, especially out of conference, some of those out-of-conference games are scheduled like 5, 7, 10 years in advance. So Kurt Cignetti has no control over what got scheduled maybe back in 2016 for 2024. So, look, is it something that should be weighed? Yes, but I think the fact that Indiana has also dominated almost every single one of their games should matter.
So what have you seen from the Hoosiers, and do you think they're legit? Are they legitimately a college football playoff team near the top of the Big Ten where they sit right now?
I do think so. I think they have a really good quarterback. They have 4 really good receivers, 2 good backs, a defense that's played at an elite level for most of the year. Their front 7 is fantastic, and I think that's the part that could give Ohio State a lot of problems. And Ohio State offensive line that has several injuries to it, and it's going to have a couple of backups playing, especially probably at center and left guard in this game. I think Indiana can absolutely play with Ohio State. I think it's going to be a close game. I have Ohio State winning, but only by 1 score. I think it's going to be a tight game. And Indiana, if Curtis Rourke plays well, they're going to have every opportunity to win this game.
So what are the keys when you look at that? What determines – and if Ohio State loses, they're in a heap of hurt relative to the college football playoff. That'd be a 2-loss Big Ten team that is not playing in the Big Ten championship game.
Right. So, and they would be. I still think Ohio State at 10-2 would get in, especially with a win over Penn State and their 2 losses being to Oregon and Indiana. But for Ohio State, it's the offensive line. Indiana's defensive line is really good. Michael Kamara leads the nation in pressures. They got other good players like C.J. West and James Carpenter up front that can cause a lot of problems. And most importantly, stop the run. This Ohio State team still wants to run the football, but if you can't block guys up front, then you have a problem. So I think for Ohio State, it's their offensive line. And I think Indiana, they're going to need, I do think to win, they're going to need a special performance from Curtis Rourke. And they have a very balanced offense, and it's not a complicated offense. They just execute at an extremely high level. Can they get, a handful, 4 or 5 explosive plays down the field from Rourke and the receivers? They got a couple of them against Michigan, but they started to slow down in the second half. Can they handle the pass rush, and can they have enough time to make explosive plays down the field?
When you look at other games, what other games you paying attention to this week, and what are your thoughts on them as well?
So I got to be honest. I think the second game for me, I love this game in the Big 12 between BYU and Arizona State. And we saw BYU come off a tough loss last week to Kansas, may have knocked them out of at-large contention in the playoff. And Arizona State very quietly has gotten blazing hot. They've won 5 of their last 6 games. Their quarterback, Sam Levitt's playing really well. The game is at Arizona State. I think you have a very tight game between 2 desperate teams that still basically control their own destiny to get to and maybe win the Big 12 title game. Arizona State is a team that we need to be talking about as a potential playoff contender, especially if they win this week against BYU.
Any other ones that grab your attention?
You have to, just for the chaos of it, look at Notre Dame and Army. And Army being undefeated, although on a softer schedule, just for the scenario of it. Now, I think Notre Dame is winning. I think Notre Dame is firing off on all cylinders right now. But just for the chaos of it, if Army found a way to win this game, we could be talking about a scenario. First of all, Notre Dame would very likely be out at 10-2, especially with losses to NIU and Army on their schedule. But, you start talking about, okay, could Army go undefeated, winning the American? Could you get 2 group of 5 teams? Would they jump Boise? Where do we get them in an at-large conversation, especially with a win over Notre Dame? And if they win their conference, a big win over Tulane, who's also ranked right in front of them, or maybe right behind them. I just think this Army-Notre Dame game could bring a lot of chaos if we do get the kind of that miracle scenario where Army upsets them.
Yeah, it'll be fun to watch. And, the offense Army runs, not easy to simulate. So you get on them early, and you never know. They hold the ball for a long time when they're going well.
Absolutely. I mean, it's all about ball control. It's all about stopping the run. I will say Notre Dame did a very good job when they beat Navy, and Navy's a very good football team as well. A little less traditionally triple option than Army is nowadays. Navy throws the ball a little bit more, but you're right. If all it takes is 1 or 2 mistakes, and Army get a lead and start milking the clock, and these games start to speed up on you real quick when you talk about it. I think there was a drive against North Texas where they had a 14-minute drive. I forget, it was like 20-something plays and 14 minutes long. So that's how quickly it can get away from you. But I think Notre Dame's got a lot of the same goals. They want to run the football. They want to control the clock, occasionally go play action with Riley Leonard, and then they want to play great defense.
Dalton Wasserman, as always, great stuff. Appreciate the time and the insight. Thanks very much, Dalton.
Appreciate it as always, Dave. Thank you.
Dalton Wasserman, PFF data analyst. Make sure you check him out. Co-host of the PFF College Football Show. It's going to do it for this edition of Sports for CLE. We'll see you back here tomorrow at 4 o'clock. Have a great night, everybody. See you tomorrow at 4 on Sports for CLE.